When it comes to the European Union, perhaps there are three issues that we have to keep in mind. First of all, it's a conflict in Ukraine. By and large, the expectation is that under President Trump 2.0, there's going to be more pressure on Ukraine and Russia to come to the negotiating table and finalize a peace deal. On paper, it looks like something that Donald Trump, with his art of the deal supposed genius, is going to finish anytime soon. But upon closer examination, the fact of the matter is that it's going to be a complicated process. President Zelensky of Ukraine has made it clear that no country is going to pressure them into something that does not serve their national interests and preserve their territorial integrity. At the same time, President Vladimir Putin of Russia has warned that he's willing to escalate the situation, and there are even worries about usage of tactical nuclear weapons by Russia if the situation is not put under control. No matter what Trump does in the coming months, the reality is that Europe has to more directly contribute to, if not carry the water, as far as the Ukraine conflict is concerned. After all, it's in their own neighborhood. That means that countries like France, Germany, among others, will have to more directly contribute to stabilization of the situation in Ukraine. And if the war continues and if Donald Trump pulls back, then Europe has to fill in the vacuum. And that's just the conflict in Ukraine, which is something existential for European leaders. And then we have the conflict in the Middle East, where the European Union and key European powers like France are playing a direct role. Recently, France, together with the United States, oversaw a ceasefire between Hezbollah forces in Lebanon and the Israeli government. It was one of the few good news so far as the conflict in the Middle East is concerned. But the Gaza conflict is presenting its own complications for Europe. On one hand, Europe has consistently said that it's committed to international law, and with the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice getting involved in adjudicating whether there are mass atrocities in the Gaza conflict, that has put Europe under pressure. On one hand, the EU policy chief, Joseph Borrell, has made it clear that Europe cannot pick and choose when it comes to jurisdiction and decisions by international courts, namely the ICC decision to issue warrants of arrest for top Israeli leaders like Benjamin Netanyahu. At the same time, some of the member states, most especially France, have indicated that they have a much more nuanced take on the issue of jurisdiction of the ICC, but more importantly in terms of whether they should arrest some of the Israeli leaders in the future should they visit Paris or any major European territory. Now, no matter what is the basis or merits of these legal debates, the reality is that it's feeding into this perception that Europe, along with the United States, are engaged in double standard. Some critics would even talk about hypocrisy. After all, European leaders have consistently emphasized that international law is foundational to a rules-based international order. In fact, earlier this year, Chancellor Olaf Scholz of Germany encouraged President Marcos Jr. during their meeting in Berlin to support or at least be cooperative with the ICC as it investigates potential mass atrocities during the drug war of former President Rodrigo Duterte. By and large, when it comes to the European Union, international law and rules-based order have been the central thrust of their values-based international policy. But of course, the third issue that we have to keep in mind is Europe's relationship with our part of the world. Over the past half a decade, more and more European countries and eventually the European Union released its own Indo-Pacific strategy. The reality is that Europe has to deal with a lot of problems in its own backyard. From Ukraine to the Middle East, there are multiple conflicts that are going to keep Europe busy for the foreseeable future. But at the same time, Europe also sees a lot of opportunities and challenges in our part of the world. On one hand, it's the economics of it, the draw of the Chinese market, the burgeoning and enlarging middle class in Southeast Asia, in Indonesia, Philippines, and Vietnam, the exports from dynamic economies in East Asia to Europe. All of those things are, of course, extremely important to European economies. But at the same time, Europe is also concerned about stability in international sea lanes of communication. Some of the key countries, like France, for instance, have territories and direct interest in the Indo-Pacific region. They're also developing defense relationship with multiple partners in this part of the world, from India to the Philippines to Vietnam. And then obviously, there's a big question of China. From a potential conflict in Taiwan to a catastrophic confrontation in the South China Sea China's foreign policy will be very much important to determining the future of peace, order, and prosperity in Asia. And given Europe's growing interest in our part of the world, they have an interest to also play an important role in facilitating a constructive approach to those simmering conflicts. A second Trump administration could mean more tensions. It could also mean a grand bargain between United States and China. That is the dilemma for a lot of Asian countries. At once, they expect that the US will pressure them to contribute more directly to burden sharing and preservation of a US-led regional order, buying more American weapons, increasing their defense spending, more proactive military and defense diplomacy. But on the other hand, Asian countries, especially allies of the United States, are also worried that Trump may cut his own grand bargain with China at their expense, at the expense of their sovereign rights and sovereignty. And that is where Europe comes in the picture. Although Europe has a lot to deal with, has a lot on its plate, and has obviously its own limitations, not to mention transatlantic tensions to manage when it comes to Donald Trump's second term in office, the fact of the matter is that Europe can be a very important partner also for Asia. It can act in many ways as a third force, a stabilizing force, and a constructive player in our part of the world. By leveraging its economic prowess, its growing defense presence in our part of the world, and more importantly, its public diplomacy and rules-based approach to global affairs. Massimo, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks a lot,
Grazie mille.
for this
Welcome to the Philippines. Of course, freshly minted EU ambassador to the Philippines. Right off the bat, I mean, we had your predecessor here, but for those who didn't catch that episode, what is the European Union, right? What is the European Union after Brexit? Are you even important? Should we care about the EU?
Thanks a lot, Richard, for this nice invitation.
But not that question.
No, also for the question. I think the European Union stays as the best creature that we could, the founders could think about. Brexit or not, it stays as a super bloc of 27 so far member states who are happy to bring together their difference. You know, united in diversity is our motto. Jointly working to make a common vision stronger, because when you are many, you are stronger. Basically consolidating all what is related to the economy, to the internal market. It is one single important space for almost 500,000 inhabitants. You can imagine what it means for normal life, for everyday life. An integrated space for labor market, an integrated space for most of the European Union countries when it is about coming from out of Europe. So one single currency for most of the member states. This means that you go to each and every EU member state and you don't need to take care of changing your currency because you can use your one in any other country. And above all, a strong, united foreign policy, which is very important, in particular when, as a EU ambassador, you have to work and to consolidate the partnership with a third country. It is a single European Union bloc that gives you the power to do it. So every time that I meet with somebody, I can say that I'm doing it not only representing myself, it doesn't count too much representing myself, but I'm representing a bloc of 27 member states.
That was the Kissinger point, right? Like, who am I going to call in EU, right? I mean, of course, he said it in a very dismissive way when it comes to Henry Kissinger. But what you're saying is that you have come far enough throughout the years that you think from Mogherini to Joseph Borrell, now you have a foreign policy chief who truly represents and reflects the region in terms of its foreign policy outlook.
It's very true. I would say that in general terms, maybe part of that question still is there. I must be honest on that, in the sense that indeed we have a high representative now for the foreign policy and for the security in European Union. So, by the way, just now changing because 1st of December is the date the new commission is starting. And High representative means foreign policy. At the same time, as you know, that the combination of our tools is enormous, in particular, including for the promotion of our security policy. So it would be very difficult for me to think about the European Union with the High Representative, but without the President of the European Commission and the President of the European Council. It is an important trio. It is the President of the European Commission, President of the European Council, and High Representative for Foreign Policy and Security who make it happen possible for the European Union to project its external dimension. It's a combination of the work between among these three fundamental elements of, institutionally speaking, of the European Union that a strong European foreign policy is possible. The High Representative brings the foreign policy element and the security-related one. The President of the European Commission is the President of 27 in total commissioners, including herself. It means that she brings out all the policies having implications for the external dimension, economy, development, trade. This all is in her own, in the portfolio of her commission. And then the President of the European Council, he chairs basically the meetings of the 27 leaders, the 27 European Union member states heads of state and government. They meet regularly to give the so-called strategic guidance to the European Union, meaning the strategy of the projection of the European Union outside, towards other countries, towards the most important international developments, towards the most relevant crises, and towards the collaboration and positive cooperation with third countries and international organizations.
Let's talk about this, because with Donald Trump coming back, and we had a couple of guests here from Washington, D.C. that were in town for other reasons, so we had all sorts of speculations about what the second Trump administration could mean. My understanding in Europe is that strategic autonomy is a priority to you, and President Emmanuel Macron has consistently emphasized that Europe has to eventually develop sufficient capabilities. Now, obviously, that's a more poignant point because Trump has a different understanding of how the Ukraine conflict should be approached. Now, we can speculate about where Zelensky stands, where Putin stands, but is there a sense in Europe that you'll have to step up eventually and more directly take care of the Ukraine conflict in ways that perhaps you didn't have to, because the Biden administration, in fairness to them, really carried the water in many ways, to be fair to them, at least on the military front?
On the military front. Richard, thanks for this. Let me start by saying that the EU and US bond is there. It's clear that there are some elements that independently who is for any of the blocks or any of the countries, there are some elements that are fixed. The EU-US transatlantic relationship is there and will stay there.
Right.
Then there are the contingencies of who, from a moment to another moment, is president from both the European Union side and the US side. And then their projection towards external events. The European Union, together with the US and together with most of the planet, has been a clear staunch of the supporter of the territorial integrity of Ukraine, and has been clear in condemning the Russian aggression against Ukraine. To this, it has corresponded a fundamental, strong help from the European Union side and the US side to Ukraine militarily, but also not militarily, I mean in terms of economy, development, exactly, humanitarian, etc. Now, the President Trump still has to start, of course, his second term, so we will need first to see how we will wish to decline his intentions, because we have heard about his ideas to try to facilitate an ending to the conflict. From the European Union side, we are, and I'm pretty sure from the US side too, we are together with Ukraine, definitely supporter of any possible peace that respects the territorial integrity of Ukraine, that respects international law. This is something that puts together very much the European Union with Philippines too,
right.
And that in particular does not allow, any solution should never allow the might to prevail on the rule of law. Military implications. The European Union and its member states have been given an enormous help and assistance to Ukraine on the military front. The European Union and its member states will continue doing it. Will continue doing it also under the new EU institutional framework that we were just discussing before. On whether it will be doing it with the US or not, I'm pretty sure this will be the case. We'll be still doing it together. Clearly, the modalities, the intensity, this will be up to President Trump and to, of course, the US administration to decide upon. But I'm pretty sure that the European Union will continue making its own part into this. Whether or not it will be needed to, how to say, to do even more, well, the European Union and its member states will continue doing all what is possible for defending the rule of law and for defending Ukraine in this that stays as an aggression, that has an aggressor, Russia, and a victim, which is Ukraine.
Now, a little bit to the other side of your map, of course, the Middle East is also very close to Europe, at least geographically. The conflict in Gaza, of course, has been tragic on so many levels. At the same time, it's also presenting some big questions for the rules-based international order. Well, as far as the United States is concerned, I think many critics will point out that the fact that at some points the U.S. even is threatening to sanction the ICC. In the past, we saw that the Trump administration took a very strident position versus international bodies, Europe-based bodies that criticize or try to adjudicate its conduct of war in Afghanistan, for instance. So when it comes to the U.S., I think there's a kind of a calibrated expectation. We have seen this for the past decades. But when it comes to Europe, there's always this expectation that you're not only hosting these bodies like ICC and ICJ and PCA and whatnot, but that international law is part of your DNA, your foreign policy DNA. And Josep Borrell, your foreign policy high commissioner, he has talked about the fact that you cannot pick and choose. And speaking of pick and choose, maybe not in the Philippines, because I think the Philippines has been very much aligned to fellow democracies, which is something we'll discuss later on more in terms of supporting Ukraine. And also, even on the Gaza conflict, much closer position to US and the West. But if you go across ASEAN and beyond, one of the things they talk about is double standards, if not hypocrisy, or at least certain gaps, whereby, like Russia is not a member of the ICC, and yet Putin warrants of arrest was welcome. And now we're hearing that some of your member countries are arguing that because Israel is not a member, therefore they cannot effectuate the ICC warrant of arrest issued against the Israeli leaders. What is the EU position there? I mean, you're a lawyer by training, I know, so you're a perfect person to talk to. I understand this is a complicated legal issue. We can have hours of debate about it. But my concern is that it is much easier for the Chinas and Russias of this world to weaponize this issue and say, look at the West. They only like international law when it's protecting their interests, right? And we can also see how other ASEAN countries who are not supportive on Ukraine are using this case to say, see, how can you expect us to be supportive when you are also just choosing your national interest? It's a frank argument I'm laying out there. I'm curious, Ambassador, how do you read the situation from an EU ambassador position?
Richard, thanks a lot. Let me start by saying that when it comes to the ICC as such, all the 27 member states are of the same view. We are all part to the ICC. We all ratified the ICC Rome Statute. It's also true, these are in the reality of facts, that there are other third countries that have not, other states that have not signed or ratified the statute. So this, of course, as you rightly say, creates an element of complexity that would be better not to have, but this is a reality of facts. We are and remain supportive of any initiative that a rule of law-based body has and decides to take. And we count very much, of course, at the same time of the effectiveness of these international judicial bodies or prosecutorial bodies. I'm very much aware about the issues of the so-called double standards. You mentioned the conflict in the Middle East, which is, as you rightly say, a bit exacerbated this, in particular in talking to some to some third countries. It is not the case for the Philippines, with whom,
No,
as you were saying, the cooperation is fantastic, also from the point of view of
we hosted President Zelensky here, right?
Exactly.
We have a special relationship.
Voila. On that, no doubt. I mean, on Russian aggression, there is a full alignment. It's true that with some other third countries, it has been a bit complex to explain the fact that we were so clear and convergent on the Russian aggression against Ukraine issue, while on the Middle East, we have often heard, by the way, from both sides, that our let's say, efficacy, effectiveness was not the same as for Ukraine. It's clear that in the case of the Middle East, the conflict comes from much time ago. It's clear that every time, whenever we have to decide upon important questions, we do it via unanimity. And it's clear that there can be topics where this unanimity comes with more complexity. At the same time, the European Union has been very clear and able, in any case, to frame its own position also when it comes to the conflict in the Middle East. The Council of the European Union has been able to, and also European Council, so the highest stance of the European Union in terms of decision making has been clear in even formulating its own so-called conclusions. These are the official positions of the highest EU body on the Middle East issue. Third countries, non-third countries being part of the ICC. We, in general terms, not only support the ICC, but also we support the fact that all countries do ratify the Rome Statute. Still, this is an outreach that we can conduct. The EU is not part of the EU to force at any cost the internal decision-making or the political decision-making of third countries towards whether or not to the adhering to international standards. I must say that independently on the ratification or not, so being part or not to the Rome Statute, so to the ICC, I think we can be pretty honest and clear in saying that the track record of some third countries, third compared to the European Union, who are not part of the ICC, is not exactly the same track records of countries who are not part, or others who are not part of the ICC. So there is a human rights, there is an international human rights, there is an international abidance to rule of law track record, which differs a lot among countries. So in this respect, and with all due respect to the position by Russia or China on this, but I think that I wouldn't put, let's say, on the same equal footing.
False equivalence.
False equivalence is
right.
Only based on who ratified and who not the Rome Statute. I mean, the adherence by the US to the international law, I think, cannot be compared to the adherence by other, in particular those that I was mentioning before, partners.
Obviously, the ICC issue is very close to our heart. I mean, of course, our hearts go to the victims of the Bucha massacre, the horrible atrocities of Russian forces in Ukraine, to victims of the horrible atrocities in October 7, and at the same time, thousands of children and women who have lost their lives in Gaza, and also, of course, unfortunately, also the conflict spreading to Lebanon. Now, obviously, our heart also goes to allegedly tens of thousands of Filipinos who lost their lives during the drug war of the former Philippine government administration. And earlier this year, I was in Berlin. We met Chancellor Scholz right after he met President Marcos, and Chancellor Scholz was very clear that, on the ICC question, that he hopes the Philippines makes the right decision, and of course Germany, as a key member of the European Union, stands by international law. That's why it's important for us to see Europe itself projecting consistency, right? Because you're also trying to, be a moral inspiration, if I can put that word, because you're obviously not imposing your values on us. When it comes to the ICC issue here, what is the stance of EU on the ongoing investigations into the mass atrocities? And I know it's a very delicate issue, and the Marcos administration has, to put it also delicately, evolving position on the degree of cooperation they want to have with ICC. But what is the EU stance? What do you prefer? Again, you're obviously not imposing, but what do you prefer the Philippine government to do on the ICC question with allegedly tens of thousands of lives lost during the drug war of Duterte, President Duterte.
Richard, on this very specific issue, so in the framework of our general position, which is normally to encouraging, of course, all third countries to be part of the ICC, of the Rome Statute, but coming to the very concrete question that you are putting to me, the Philippines has been part of the ICC till a certain moment, so there are specific concrete facts that took place when the Philippines was part to the ICC. This means that, as per statute, there are specific obligations stemming from, for the Philippines,
residual jurisdiction.
Jurisdiction that regularly, whenever we have the occasion and we do to discuss about these topics with our Philippine counterparts, we confirm that we support the importance to comply with these obligations. So this independently on, let's say, the issue of the Philippines going back to be a member of the ICC. But there are, in any case, residual obligations. So whenever we have the occasion to discuss about this, we confirm this position to the Philippine authorities. Our thinking is that from a cooperation, a good cooperation with the International Criminal Court on these issues, we would be able together to guarantee also a sense of justice to those who have been victims of these facts, horrendous facts. So there is, on the one side, if you want, the legal argument, then there is the political argument, and I fully appreciate the complexities, as you were saying, Richard, on this issue. And then there is, if you want, the moral ethic dimension that should not be underestimated. Right. So there is a sense of justice to which also the cooperation, general justice, to which also the cooperation with the ICC can be, let's say, functional, and we support very much this.
And what is your understanding of the human rights situation right now? Because obviously, just the gravity of alleged extrajudicial killings and mass atrocities was so much during the previous administration that my sense sometimes is that we're not paying as much attention to some concerns by Human Rights Watch, some of the folks I've talked to in civil society groups, and saying that there are indeed still continuing abuses or alleged abuses. What is the EU's position on that, and how are you helping rule of law capacity building in the Philippines, if I can put it that way?
Richard, human rights is a topic which is as fundamental as dynamic at the same time in all parts of the world.
Right.
I'm coming from the European Union, and also in the European Union we have mechanisms according to which there is a monitoring of the situation of the human rights in our own 27 countries, which is a regular monitoring. It is a monitoring according to which each and every member state is, if you want, accountable towards the other 26 about his conduct in terms of human rights situation or human rights respect, etc. Why? Because human rights defense and operating in the correct human rights dimension is a constant policy element, is a constant element of societies which are dynamic. So also the definition of which human right is a human right is something which is dynamic. This is why we have these mechanisms, and this is why in our projection towards third countries, including with the Philippines, we support very much the promotion of the human rights. In general terms, we have had very recently a meeting, we call it, it's a kind of a technical thing, but it gives the sense. It's called the subcommittee between the EU and the Philippines on good governance, human rights and rule of law. In sum, what it is putting into practice yearly an exercise where the two sides, the European Union and the Philippines, gather once in the Philippines and once in the European Union in Brussels in order to exchange views on the respective human rights situation. Our assessment on the human rights situation in the Philippines is the following. It is very, very encouraging. This also stems from the joint conclusions that the two sides have drawn in the course of the last meeting taking place just a few weeks ago. In general terms, the European Union expressed support for the work that is being still now conducted by the Philippines in the human rights dimension and sector. We consider that there have been very important and good advancements in the track record of human rights in the country. At the same time, indeed, the two parties even agreed that there are topics that deserve further attention. You were referring to the extrajudicial killing before, topics like, for example, the promotion and protection of specific human rights situation in other sectors were also addressed. Special attention is put, for example, also in how much civil society components are involved in the shaping and then implementation of human rights policies, national human rights policy in the country. It must be an inclusive exercise. These are all topics among the many that were covered in these discussions, and on which not only there was the meeting, but then the meeting was not an end in itself, because the meeting then has a follow-up that I have been, by the way, the pleasure to already take care, because these things need to be followed quickly, in view of reporting to higher bodies foreseen by the EU, the Philippines agreement, and to which these subcommittees are responsible.
Last but most important for me also, at least in certain ways, just as important, Ursula von der Leyen was here the other year, and there was an emphasis on maritime security cooperation. So clearly there's growing convergence also in terms of our geopolitical interests, right? We want stable sea lines of communications. There's a concern about, China's assertiveness in adjacent waters. And at the same time also we are, giving a new momentum to our free trade agreement negotiations. And my understanding with how things operate is that you cannot separate geopolitics from geoeconomics. That in many ways the Philippines is being, again, given a second gaze as a natural partner of Europe. As I mentioned a while ago, in the entire Southeast Asian region, you may not find a country that is as aligned in terms of values and outlook as the Philippines, with all due respect to our neighbors, whether it's on Ukraine, whatever major conflict you have in mind. Can you tell us a little bit about that? How important is the Philippines becoming? Again, I don't want to be presumptuous, but what do you see in the Philippines in years to come, in the next 3 years or so you're going to be here and beyond, as strategic partners?
It's very interesting, Richard, that you have put together the trade dimension and the international rule of law dimension, which is exactly the way that sometimes when I'm asked, but why the European Union cares about our West Philippine Sea or South China Sea? We are so far. Well, if we don't want to, let's say, dwell too much on the fundamental aspect of the promotion of the international rules-based order, which is the element number one, why the EU cares, also the EU cares about this. Let's just think about the trade. Around 1/3, actually something more than 1/3 of the trade that crosses this sea gets to Europe. So this is in itself, I think, a clear explanation about how much the two things can be interlinked. Where I see the Philippines going together with the EU in the next 3 years, well, I hope very far and well, considering that this coincides with the duration of my mandate, and I'll do my best in order to make the best of it. In order to deliver on this, so I would definitely mention the FTA. You mentioned the free trade agreement negotiations. They just started very well last October. We'll have several negotiations round in the course of the next years. I count very much on this being one of the deliverables, not for my mandate. I'm alone, not enough to do this, but it's about the interplay between two excellent teams, the European Union one and the Philippine one. Another important aspect that you were mentioning, cooperation in the maritime domain. I think we can do more for our partnership in enhancing security, and not only security. I would rather call it wider cooperation in the maritime domain. I think there is a lot that we can do there. Because security and trade often go together. I think there is also a good, important room of maneuver when it comes to linking even more our current support to the Philippines when it comes to development cooperation more to the business. So if you want a stronger link between the public element, a public policy element with a business to business, it's only empowering, I think, the more the private sector, including with what we do, that we can be ensuring that the country becomes even more resilient to external shocks.
And what about the infrastructure issue? You have the Global Gateway Initiative, among others. Are we also expecting more EU-Philippines cooperation on that front?
This is the idea. This is the idea. This is the intention. Global Gateway is a good way for the European Union and its member states, because it is a joint endeavor,
Right.
to help the Philippines in also when it comes to infrastructure. Let me also mention there, together with infrastructure, digitalization, because there where you don't get with the infrastructure, you can still try to help via the reinforcement of the digital related
Right.
parts. We'll do a lot
Soft
with that.
infrastructure.
Soft infrastructure.
Right.
And more in general, still Global Gateway, so still UN member states together with the Philippines on all what is related to green economy, circular
Right.
economy, climate. Because it is
Right.
this the nexus then can have a good interplay for the prosperity of the business in this
So
country.
infrastructure resilience, because as we speak, the Philippines is still recovering from this unprecedented succession of super typhoons hitting the country, and we're recovering from that. To end on a light note, your predecessor had his own version of food diplomacy. You're an Italian. I think you have no problem in doing food diplomacy, and also maybe football diplomacy, right? Do you have plans also to continue your predecessor's cultural diplomacy in that sense?
I'm more than on football. It's more on food, because on food it's indeed I'm Italian, so
Yeah.
I like enjoying the pleasure of trying new taste, new flavors.
Regional foods, just like in Italy, different regions,
Exactly.
Philippines,
In every
different
region,
foods.
you have a
Absolutely,
different offer, which is the case also here. So I'm very eager to continue my culinary experience here too. One word, because 3 months can be short, but can be enough to understand some dynamics. You mentioned the climate and the food related, if I
Right.
can call it like that. So climate resilience, disasters, Philippines being the number one country in terms of risk-prone, disaster-prone country. A big applause from my side to how the strength of the Filipino resilience when it comes to this, because this accompanies very well the government's effort to do a lot for this, to anticipate events and to respond to events. But then there is an important physical, personal dimension, which is the
Right.
resilience. This is something that in 3 months I could witness, and on which we also tried to help with our assistance. But it is Filipino-led first.
On that note, Ambassador Massimo, thank you very
Richard,
much for
thanks a
that.
lot.
Grazie mille. That was
Grazie.
great. Catch us again next week here on One News. You can also check out the long conversation on Spotify and YouTube. I'm Richard Heydarian, and that was The View from Manila, where One News, all sides, all the time.